Welcome back to the Augustana Observer podcast. And it's a big surprise that we kind of have a two-part episode this week. And today is the second part of the episode. My name is Jaren Smith. I am your podcast director at Augustana College. I am here today with Alex Crawford of the Learning Commons. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, do you mind telling me your position here in the Learning Commons?
Sure. So I'm the Director of Academic Support. So what that kind of means is I help create programs that help support Augustana students during their learning journeys. So I've been in this position for about a year now, and there have been a lot of changes in that year. So one thing that has changed, tutoring has opened up to any student who is enrolled in a supported course. In the past, you could only get an individual appointment with a tutor if you were earning a C or lower. That has now changed, so you can log into Starfish at any time to connect with a tutor. And that was in efforts to make our services more accessible and to provide some more consistency for the Augustana experience. Also started an academic coaching program, so you can meet individually with a peer to talk about not necessarily skills like, hey, how do I know how cell division works in biology, but how do you manage your time? How do you study for biology? So it's like all the skills around your experience as a student. The academic coaches can talk about that experience. So I administer those two programs. I will meet with students individually to talk about their academic experience and however it is they want to grow and improve. I'm here to support them and working on some new projects too. So just stay tuned.
Yeah, it's really nice to kind of hear some of those changes because I know with my freshman and sophomore year, because the let's say older rules, like you're saying, with the essentially the C or below, that's what the rule. And I recently found out that the rule is different, so it's nice to hear that. And can you tell me a little bit about kind of what was kind of some of the decision and talk that went about changing the rule? Yeah.
So it was something just in terms of my experience. The way that rule was applied was just a little bit outside of best practices for administering programs in this way. So when I was interviewing for the position here, I was really excited about Augustana's mission. I myself went to a small liberal arts college and understood very well, kind of what that experience was like, and was excited to go back to it. And I basically, worked with faculty, with my with my supervisor. Those in the Learning Commons got a lot of feedback, collected feedback from students about the program. Took a really deep dive into the data to track our historical usage and what demand has been like, and proposed a model that hopefully would meet the demand and increase that a little bit, kind of based on what students were looking for. So it took about a year to go through that process. So this is the first semester that we are finally let loose and giving this all a try. So it's a bit of a learning curve. There's definitely some adjustments and changes and growth that still needs to happen, and we're just looking for more opportunities to improve our programs as we go forward.
It makes me really, really glad to hear that, because kind of getting to the point we are at in the semester, because I can even speak from my own perspective that this year it's been a little bit more tough for me compared to years past, and I didn't really feel burnout too much my freshman and sophomore year, but this year I definitely am feeling a little bit. And I know that a lot of people have been stressed out for a while, and I know that in a couple of weeks we're gonna have finals, and I know kind of during that time can be very, very stressful to some students. So kind of in some of the things that you do, how do you kind of advise some of like the tutors and saying like, this is how we should kind of help people for finals week?
Yeah. So generally, I encourage our tutors and our academic coaches to kind of meet the students wherever they are at in their learning process and encourage them to suggest strategies that would best fit with the students' learning. And what I mean by that, if someone tells me that they are really great at managing their time when things are written down with like a physical planner, I'm not going to tell them, okay, well, you need to switch to an electronic planner because that's the way things are done. Instead, we'll talk about strategies to make that paper planner stronger, and then kind of go from there. I like to encourage students generally to treat themselves as a wonderful experiment. Oftentimes, studies show that students who are I'm trying to think of how to phrase this.
No
Sorry. Who are using different learning strategies and study strategies will often fall back on the strategies that are most familiar for them, even if they are not going to be the most effective or the most useful for the task that they're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
So oftentimes when I speak with students, when I ask them about their study strategies and the way that they are approaching things, they'll tell me things like, I'm rereading my notes and I'm rereading my textbook as some of the more popular strategies. When in fact the most effective study strategy is going to be self-testing and trying to make sure that you know the material without looking back at like your notes and kind of testing what you can do on your own and how you can apply the tasks that are expected of you on the exam. So it's not enough necessarily to know the order of operations for math. You also have to be able to apply and solve problems using that particular skill. So I always tell students, I don't want the first time that you're experiencing the application of a problem or analyzing and comparing and contrasting two different philosophers with each other. I don't want that experience to happen for the first time on an exam. Want to practice that when you're in studying mode and can kind of learn from your mistakes.
I understand. And here I'm going to kind of take a different approach, because at least in my understanding, because like the way you're going to study for, say, a biology exam, it's going to be different from another major. Because like, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like with me, like a lot of the stuff that I have to do during finals week or even throughout the semester, it's mostly going to be papers and projects. Like I'll have a few quizzes here and there, but for the most part, mostly papers and projects. So I guess really from that perspective, if like other students are feeling similar, it is in my opinion, it's a little harder to kind of self-test yourself on those than it would be for math. But I do understand what you're saying, because I took Spanish in high school and took a semester here, and what I would do is exactly that self-testing thing. Luckily, I have an older brother and older sister, and they're more fluent in Spanish than I am. So like, whenever I was like struggling, say not for like an exam, maybe like studying, I ask them was like, hey, how would you say this, for example, or what are some strategies? And they mentioned this like testing strategy with like note cards and stuff like that. So I found that really helpful for that. And then really for like, in my experience, for like MJMC and COM, for COM, it is easier to do like the self-testing for when there's exams. For MJMC, it's a little harder, but I do try to like remember certain things, because like if I have to write a thing a certain way, it's like, wait, how do you do that again? It's like, think for a second. Then it's like, oh yeah, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Then if I were to check my notes, then kind of verify that. And that's kind of like my study strategy, and kind of like the mentality I have with studying. It's not just for my majors, it's even if you handed me a math test currently. With my background, because like played football for a really, really long time. And something for me that kind of helps me is that like I'm not in competition against another team or another person. I'm in competition with myself. I want to do the best I can on all the work that I can do. And so like, I try to think of it as like, okay, like I'm going to tackle this as best as I can. Be prepared in advance, because first, like for any sport, you practice, and then game day is kind of like the exam. So that's kind of how I like to look at it. And it makes me a little less stressed because like, I know when I was younger and even still today, I had horrible test anxiety. So like, what do you do for the tutors to try to help them when they have somebody who has really bad test anxiety?
So talk through, well, first off, I think that's a really great point about like the self-testing and the, and kind of thinking about writing as like a little bit different of a process. My background is actually in tutoring with writing. Okay. So yeah, anything that you can do to get ahead on those projects. Something I discovered about myself when I was in college was that I really am a writer that writes to discover. So sometimes I don't exactly figure out what it is I'm trying to say until I'm actually writing and physically seeing the thoughts on the page. So that just meant I needed to give myself extra time to really write those papers, toss out whole paragraphs and rip it to shreds. So to give yourself some of that think time, I think is really important, to let yourself sit with the papers and with your own ideas to help develop that is really important. So I just wanted to make sure that I had like a strategy there.
No worries.
And then your question was about, I'm so sorry.
No worries. Just how do you help people like yourself if students come to you, or what advice do you give to like the student tutors whenever they're tutoring somebody who has really bad test anxiety?
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So for test anxiety, something that I like to kind of mention that's really important. Some amounts of anxiety can be productive, right? Like having a little bit of anxiety can help you rest up the night before the test, help you study before the test, can help increase your focus. When test anxiety is too high, though, or when anxiety is interfering with your ability to recall things, to focus on the problems in front of you, that's when there's a disconnect. So test anxiety is not about not preparing well for the exam. It's really about having anxiety interfere with your ability to show your instructor everything that you do know. So just my small caveat, if you're anxious about a test because there wasn't enough preparation for it, the best way to resolve that is by studying and spreading out your studying in advance. So not cramming the night before. But we talk about different ways of identifying what the source of the anxiety is. So sometimes students will tell me that they build up certain concepts, so that they're like, okay, or consequences I meant. So if I fail this chemistry test, I'm going to fail the class. I'm never going to become a veterinarian, and my life is now in crisis. So it's just kind of like a really big snowball effect. And I generally advise students, kind of based on what kind of anxiety that they are facing, to think about maybe arguing with yourself a little bit, and remembering that, it's one test in a long academic journey. And even my tutors that I work with, who are often looked at as examples and, really excellent students, mm-hmm. they sometimes don't do well on exams. And that's okay. It doesn't make them less of a tutor. It doesn't make them less of a student or less successful. It just is an experience, and one that we can learn from and grow from and improve on. So in terms of test anxiety, there's some of that mental game. Sometimes I'll talk through different physical exercises that you can do, some things that you can do the night before the test to help you get into the right mindset. But if you ever have to make the decision between studying more or getting more sleep, always choose the sleep.
Yes, because I can't speak for every college student, but I feel like I can speak for a good majority that I feel like a lot of people don't get the sleep that they need. Mm-hmm. And like, I feel like Augustana students, this does include myself, we're all so involved, and I don't want to take that away from anybody. It's just that sometimes I feel like that it's a very good thing that we're so involved, but at times where it makes us, we're a little sleep deprived, or we don't put in as much time to study for a test or do some homework. And I feel like during those times, it leads to increased stress. And yeah, I definitely feel like Augustana students and students in general can definitely get a little bit more sleep if they can. And if there's anything that I've learned in college that, say, I learned in a classroom, but at the same time I've reappreciated the value for, it is the value of sleep. Because I feel like I've had days where, say I went to bed at 10:30 and then woke up, we'll say around 8 a.m.-ish. And then like, I feel great. And like, I feel like myself, but then like, there's those times where like, oh, I have so much work. And then like, I'm up longer, then I have to get up at that same time. And I just feel like I just can't function. But I do think at times where like something that I've been doing recently, because a lot of my assignments, they're due around the same time, and a lot of them are papers, and like keeping in mind for the fact that as long as I work on them for at least a little bit at a time each day, and that I'm not up until 2 a.m, that helps put me in a good position for the next day, so that like, you know, later in the day, my free time, I can continue working on some of my assignments.
Yeah. And to have that discipline too, to like do just like a little bit each day. Actually, it's another really effective study strategy to spread out. Like if you have 5 hours of chemistry work to do, it's better to spread that over 5 days for an hour versus 5 hours on a Sunday afternoon. Plus, that just sounds kind of terrible. 5 hours on one day.
I was gonna say that is pretty tough, and then like I know I'm definitely guilty of for like projects spending a while doing like the projects, because like if anything, like I feel like for me sometimes like that test anxiety has at least a little bit turned into project anxiety. By that I mean like I know I'll get the work done. I do everything I can to put myself in the best position. It's just that's like, I'm the type of student in class, I'll ask a million questions. And I do it not just because I'm not listening to my professors, it's just because like that reassurance makes me feel like, okay, I'm on the right track.
So then you're the person everyone around's like, oh, thank goodness they're asking this question because I have that same question. Yeah. And like half the room is just like sighing and relief. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. And like another thing like me is because like I know in some of my classes I raise my hand a lot. And like I like to think I'm doing it for the right reasons. By that I mean, because I feel like with early morning classes, I understand students just woke up. They're so tired. They're still trying to wake up. And I'm in that same position. I raise my hand because, like, at least for me and how I think about it, when the class, like, nobody's participating, that's kind of awkward to me. And so, like, even if what I say is not exactly either the correct answer or relate to class content, I feel like that eases the tension of others and encourages other students to participate in class. What kind of leading into, like, my next subject is, what would you say are some of the things that students should not be doing during finals week?
Oh gosh. I think in terms of making sure that you're preparing for your study strategies, or I'm sorry, for your exams, the study strategies are going to be really important. So thinking about how it is that you're spending that time, how it is you're dividing your time, and just to take little bits each day for your different projects. I think having some sort of plan is going to be incredibly helpful and can sometimes help when students will often tell me, well, I work best under pressure. And that's why I don't, that's why I procrastinate. I do my best work when I procrastinate. And that's often not quite accurate. Oftentimes, when we wait to the last minute, the fear of not turning something in outweighs our general fear of not doing well on the assignment or of the assignment and the difficulty of the task in general. So sometimes that fear of failure and that fear of not doing something perfectly or not doing something well or being very confused can act as a paralytic initially. And then suddenly, well, I just have to get something done because that's worse than not submitting anything at all. So that's why oftentimes the inspiration will hit. But if you're able to schedule things out and have specific spots in your calendar, not just with like homework time, but specifically, I'm going to work on my paper for an hour at this time. That is like kind of like a commitment to yourself. Treat it like an appointment, and that will help you kind of get started in those moments where you're feeling like, oh, but if I put it off, I can still put it off for another day. And the other thing I recommend is definitely micro-stepping. So breaking something down to its smallest possible chunk. So for yourself, what's the smallest thing that you can do to get started on your really big paper that you have to work on?
Honestly, I'm glad you asked that, because after my class today, because I have the same professor for 2 classes, and I asked if we could have a little conversation about our other class, because I'm struggling with the paper a little bit, with writing it, and the professor was telling me that for my paper, it's like I have too many ideas for the sake of one paper. It's like I'm making 4 papers, but in one paper. And so her advice to me was to, at least to help get me writing, is to, by narrow the topic down, have your focus on one thing, and then kind of have your ideas, what you want to talk about, and kind of like other other things down the line will kind of take care of themselves. And so for me, because a lot of the work I've done for this paper so far, I can still use a lot of the work that I've done, even though that a lot of the work that I've done, I'm going to go in a completely different direction. So at the point I'm at now for this project, I believe the first draft is due November 17th. So that's 6 days in the time of this. Really just the first thing is to write down my topic that apply, then essentially any idea that I can think of that I can talk about and my research can kind of back up, I'm going to do. So like, I don't have to write a whole paper in one day, and I still have 6 days, and it's just the first draft. So I think really taking it we'll say 1 hour at a time instead of 1 day at a time. So let's say I work on the paper, later today or tomorrow, and I don't have to work on it for 9 hours, because that's crazy in my opinion. And I feel like if anything, I can take those small steps, because I feel like those small steps I take will begin to accumulate. So I guess really my strategy for the next couple of days is to try to think small, and then with each time I work on it, try to think a little bit bigger, because I feel like what I've done, which has led to me being stressed, is I've been focused on the fact that I have to make this paper, and it's something that is written in a style that I'm not very familiar with, and I know I want to do a good job, and I know that I can do a good job, and I think it's just a matter of, if I really want to do a good job, I have to make the time, because like you said, like, even if it's, like you said earlier, with like, if you have 5 hours worth of homework, it's better to stretch that across multiple days instead of doing it all in one day. And so like, I think if anything, the purpose, kind of like the first draft, it's not going to be perfect. So like, I don't have to chase perfection. So like, And I think that's where a lot of my stress had stemmed from, because I was trying to chase perfection, and I wouldn't be surprised if the professor for this particular class is like, I wasn't expecting a paper that's going to be, published or be used for grad school for the first draft. Maybe for the final draft, which is due a couple weeks later, expecting, a little bit of different work. But I don't have to be so hard on myself, I feel like, which has been the root of my stress regarding this specific paper. And I think it's the direction I'm trying to go in is going to be really helpful.
Yeah. I think all of that is really great advice. I love the idea of taking those small steps towards getting there and getting over that hurdle of it needs to be perfect the first time. No writer gets it right the first time. If I were to show you my first drafts of what I've written before, you would be embarrassed to know me. You'd be like, she teaches here? That's embarrassing. But that's the point, though. The first draft is supposed to be messy. It's supposed to be kind of ugly, and that's what the editing and revising is for. Usually, I don't even go in and do my final proofreading until the very last step, because sometimes I will remove whole sentences, whole paragraphs, and write new stuff. And what's the point of making it sound perfect if you're just going to delete it anyway?
Yeah, and kind of speaking on the first draft, because me, I come from a huge sports family, and me and my dad, he'll always talk to me about sports. That's one thing that there's many things we bond over, but that's one thing. And so the example he gave me the other day was that regards to athlete is not every athlete is going to pick up a football, pick up a basketball, and just be super successful. It takes a lot of time to get in. And, when you're playing a sport for the first time, I feel like it does a lot of harm if you think you're going to be the best the first time you do something, even if you've done it a million times. And so I just try to think of it as I'm going to do the best if this is, by the best, I mean my best, on this specific paper, whether it's my first time writing a paper or my 5 millionth time writing a paper.
Yeah. I think that's a really great mentality. I also like using the word yet in statements. So I will often hear, I'm not a math person. I'm not a good writer. And I just say, well, just add the word yet, because you could always improve and grow from your start point. You may have things that are naturally easier, some things that you pick up a little bit faster, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that just because it takes you a little bit longer to work through something doesn't mean that you can't, with practice, get better at it. So I think yet can be a very empowering word, and one that I really wish I had known when I was a student, for sure.
I'm glad you said that, because if anything, my final question was kind of is there anything that you knew now that you wish you knew when you were a student? But I really do like the yet mentality, because I do say at times that I'm not a math person, and the thing is I know that if you hand me a math test right now, I'm going to do it. I won't complain. I'll do it. I will do my best. And so there are certain areas in math that aren't my strengths, because, for example, I think in more of a algebra kind of that comes a little bit easier for me than geometry. Because I feel sometimes hearing sort of geometry related things, I'm you've lost me. You're speaking a language I don't understand. But I know that with anything, if someone wants to sit down and try, and practice at something, you can become your very best at it. And going back to the athlete mentality, practice, a lot of the athletes, they're going to practice, and it makes them better. A lot of people with writing, they practice. And everything that people do, they practice. And I think that's kind of my big, if anybody wants to take any advice that I'd give in regards to finals week, and I understand that freshmen, this is their first college finals, my advice would be to kind of be yourself, as in put in the work to put yourself in a good position, but also give yourself time to relax. And putting in that work, you can see it as practicing, or you can say that's entirely up to yourself. But I feel like if for math, like for me, for example, since I struggle with geometry, and if I had a geometry final to, put in the work now and practice to try to put in myself in my best position for me. But just wanted to ask, is there any other kind of final thoughts, maybe final tips that you'd like to give our students who are listening?
Yeah. Don't throw away exams. Don't throw away quizzes or papers, because that's kind of like your instructor is trying to guide you a little bit to give you some really important feedback. And I like to do test analysis where I will look at the problems and understand, well, why did I make this mistake? Did I misread something? Did I go too fast and select the wrong answer? Did I just straight up not even remember the concept? And that tells me something about how I need to approach my future tests and my future papers. Because if I know that if I'm finding that I'm making a lot of mistakes with one area, then I can shift my focus to either study that particular concept better, or maybe during the actual test itself, maybe I just need to slow down and check my work. So sometimes understanding why those mistakes are being made, even if it's really painful to look at the grade on this piece of paper and be like, oh gosh, this is not what I wanted to see, and go through the pain of looking at that exam again. There's a wealth of information that you can kind of look at and take apart. And since many exams are going to be cumulative, it can be really important to build on those questions and to get a solid understanding. Making your own practice exams is really great. And for that paper, something that I really struggled with, I was told most of my life, oh, you're a writer and all that stuff. And I could go into a whole thing about growth mindset. But I think something that really helped in terms of getting started on something, I would think even smaller than outlining. I would sometimes just take out the laptop and turn on the laptop, open up the Word document, type in the date and my name and like whatever header it is that I am using. I would think that's small to get started. And I've been doing that for things that sometimes I'm not really looking forward to, like getting out of bed in the morning. It was really warm and snuggly in my bed this morning, so I was in my bed, I was scrolling through my phone. So instead of just saying like, oh, I'm going to stop scrolling through my phone and just get up and start my day, that sounded like a really big task. So literally I was just like, okay, I'm going to stop scrolling, stop moving my finger. And then that was really boring, looking at the same screen. So then I could put the phone down. I said, okay, now I'm staring at a ceiling. That's boring. So I'd flip one leg over. And then that was uncomfortable. So then I'd flip the other leg over. I literally broke it down to the smallest step that I possibly could to get myself moving. And then once I was moving, once I was doing things, the motivation to continue built. Motivation isn't just some static thing within us. It is something that we build ourselves through action. And whole nother podcast going into motivation and growth mindset.
No
but
worries.
Hope that helps.
No worries. And I kind of like saying it maybe could be a future episode title. So in general, I really, really kind of like that. And I think I'm going to try to use that perspective for myself, because I think that's a really good way to look at things. But in general, I just really want to say thank you so much for your time. And I greatly appreciate getting to sit down and kind of have a conversation with you and kind of just offer people advice, because any students who are listening, you're not alone. We're all going through this together. And I wish you a very good luck on the rest of this semester and on to having a very good and fun spring semester. And thank you, and we'll see you next time.